legend says that Hercules swept Cerberus right off his feet and effortlessly set him down softly as a songbird. Atlas kept the world upon his back and every day wondered whether he could stand it any longer. And TheTaraReade came out to say the man they tried to label the messiah of morality was really just another rapist. And I don't intend to hesitate when asked who was the stronger. Tara, like Assange, knew that carrying the truth would be the hardest labor. Tara knew that her assailant wasn't gonna make us any safer. And knew he's just the type of man to hand a decent foreign leader US-printed walking papers. And knew he'd be relentless and aggressive in the war he'd wage upon her very character. That his attempts to weaken and degrade and embarrass her would be her only compensation. But I strongly doubt that anyone could ever have foreseen the stream of hate that came from quote-unquote progressives and the self-styled titans of survivor advocation. So if you really think there's something to be gained out of sharing your pain with the world, you are sorely mistaken. The Biden team just dragged their feet addressing Tara's allegations. Until they had a decent list of smears, then they aired them out on a nation. And it turns out no one wants to hear the truth of who they praised as being worthy of such bloated liberal celebration. That no one wants to really know the person they've so valiantly defended, even when it meant they had to gloat and shit all over someone braver than they'd be if given the occasion. Now cue the faceless comment squad invasion. Cue those fuckers crawling out the woodwork to come analyze the way you wore your hair and what you wear. Like your appearance waives your rights, or that somehow you're the reason for your situation. Somehow they've decided you should bear responsibility for what such monstrous men insist on doing. Somehow they're deluded by the empty, hypocritical, and useless fucking platitudes that bastard keeps on spewing. And I think it's very telling that the best of their excuses when they try to come and justify our president's abuses is a hearty butt Trump. In which case I'll remind you that you never saw the news attempt to sell us Donald Trump like he was morally upstanding or a decent human. But when Joe says something bigoted or ogles someone's little kid, CNN says, isn't this refreshing? Biden's like a mix of JFK and FDR with all the finer parts of Harry Truman. Christ, I know that they don't think that we're the brightest, but at least pretend we got a couple lumens. Ask yourself if you have ever questioned what they fed you, or do you just shut your eyes and then consume it? And now ask yourself if you ate every one of Biden's lies under guise of harm reduction and the promise of a slight improvement. And now imagine long ago that Biden chose to show you who he really was by traumatizing you for his amusement. Now imagine that you watched him touch a Bible with those filthy hands, and then assume the power of the highest seat in all the land, of knowing your attacker wields a global coalition born of three-letter agencies who'll make a life's mission out of trying to discredit you through lies, damn lies, and collusion. Big tech is never gonna separate from our surveillance state. Fuck's sakes, they're just a breath away from total fusion. So there will come a time where even if you see the light, your voice will never reach the sky through all the bots and all the noise pollution. So trust us when we tell you that the masking of abuses is perhaps this country's oldest institution. And I know nothing nobler than facing it in honor of the truth when you know that the people holding power have been neutralizing truth since there was wet ink on the Constitution. So know that Tara's truth is something crucial to the movement. And if you see yourself a partner to the revolution, help this country see through all the baseless propaganda through the crux of Joe's illusions. And recognize that TheTaraReade gave everything she had so she could tell us what the truth is. Recognize the decent thing to do when someone bares their soul and shows their bruises is not to ask for context or offer up your own solutions. Your job is just to listen with an honest mind and put yourself on Tara's side a moment so you understand the path she chooses. That there is no instant fame worth the dragging of your name. And if that's what you think, you've a lot to learn about the kind of facts the mob can handle and the kind that it refuses. You've a lot to learn about the news and all its many uses. Guess you've yet to learn the truth the news will serve as fruit from which they've squeezed out all the juices. And we all eat the husk and just pretend it's full of nutrients and isn't really useless. But the jaws of our ability to yield accountability are absolutely toothless. So don't you kid yourself that any lips are being loosened. They won't ever tell us where the bodies are or show us where the proof is. It's on you to recognize the lechery our president so regularly oozes. It's on you to muster up some honesty and ask yourself how Biden won your trust, but it's America that loses. Open up your eyes and learn to recognize the bruises. Open up your eyes and learn to recognize the bruises.
They'll gladly pay you by the hour for a minute or so, so you can sign off on the towers where they'll piss on your home. And if you feel like you're just powerless to answer them no, it's 'cause you are. They'll gladly pay you by the hour for a minute or so, so you can sign off on the towers where they'll piss on your home. And if you feel like you're just powerless to answer them no, it's 'cause you are. It's 'cause you are. They'll gladly stagnate a living wage.
Welcome everyone to the Politics of Survival. I'm your host, TheTaraReade, and we have a very special long show. So buckle up, pour yourself a glass of, or a cup of tea, or a glass of wine, or whatever you are. And I think you can only see half of me there, Reef. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, I'm working.
And we have some special guests. We have Jose Vega and Kynan Thistlehwaite and Diane Sare. And Jose and Kynan, you might have seen them. They've gone viral online because they called out AOC at a public meeting and really, put her feet to the fire about the fact she's voting for this proxy war against Russia via Ukraine. And they voiced with passion so much of what we were feeling. So we want to find out more about them. And, my audience members that are listening, I want to thank you. I want to thank Indy. I want to thank Reef. INN Network, because there's very few places right now where you can get balance and you can find some other lens besides, talking points from the Department of Defense. So thank you, INN, for the platform, and to everyone who's listening and watching right now. Go ahead and chat and type in your questions because we're live, and Reef will get them to me, my fine engineer. Now I'm on my phone tonight because so I look a little not the usual way because don't have internet. So it might be a little glitchy, but if it is, Reef will take over because really the focus is going to be on these brave young activists, Jose and Kynan, because you know what? This is their world that these politicians that have been, rotting in their seats like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden and Dianne Feinstein with 40, 50 years in their political seats, never making any change, and more endless wars, just like Julian Assange predicted the endless war. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Jose Vega and Kynan Thistlehwaite. We're going to start with Kynan. Kynan, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and, what prompted you to call out AOC at that public meeting? And you know what, right before you do that, just for the audience members that may have been offline for a few days or whatever, or under a rock, Reef, would you put up the video just so they know what we're talking about? We're going to play that and then I'll bring you on, Kynan.
None of this matters unless there's a nuclear war, which you voted to send arms and weapons to Ukraine. Tulsi Gabbard, she's left the Democratic Party because they're a bunch of war hawks, okay? You originally voted, you ran as an outsider, yet you've been voting to start this war in Ukraine. You're voting to start a thermonuclear war with Russia and China. Why are you playing with the lives of American citizens? You're playing with our lives.
There will be no neighbors if there's a nuclear bomb. You voted to mobilize and send money to Ukrainian Nazis. You're a coward. You're a progressive socialist. Where are you against the war mobilization? He's telling the right truth. You have done nothing. Tulsi Gabbard has shown guts where you've shown cowardice. I believed in you, and you became the very thing you sought to fight against. That's what you've become. You are the establishment, and you are the reason why everybody will end up in a nuclear war unless you choose to stand up right now and denounce the Democratic Party. Will you do that? Yes or no? Okay, simple. Are you going to stop nuclear war? Yes or no? There is no line, because this is bullshit. None of this matters if we're all dead. None of it. You know that. Then let's take it up right now, because this is the only thing that matters. This is the only thing that matters right now. We could be in a nuclear war at any minute, and you continue to fund it. That's what's going on. Why not right now? You're the liar here. Nobody has held you accountable. That's what's happening. And it is time for you to stand up and realize that what you've been saying has been lies. Let your conscience come through for once.
You've been rude. That's why, I mean, okay, like we're facing nuclear annihilation, but we have to put it nicely. So Kynan, your thoughts, and then Jose. Kynan, you first.
Well, thanks for having us on, Tara. I'll just preface this by saying that I didn't say third nuclear war. I said thermonuclear war. I wasn't the one who subtitled that.
I'm sorry, that was me. That was me. I messed that up. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But anyways, so what had happened, on the day of the intervention, Jose had told me that there was this town hall going on in the Bronx, and I was actually supposed to work that day. I'm a proctor who works at a nursing school, and I'm like, you know what, I'd like to go, but I can't really do it. And then a couple of hours go by, and then he calls me. He's like, okay, so I'm going to this thing by myself. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't go. He's like, no, don't be sorry about it. It is what it is. And I'm like, you know what, I really should go to this thing. So I call my boss at the last minute, and I got someone else to fill in for me. So then we go to the school. I think we get there about 20 minutes early. Our friend gets us in. He's a constituent, and he'll remain unnamed for now. But we get in, and this is actually the first intervention I've ever done. So I'm just, shaking there, nervous, just wondering what to say. And then, I decide I'm just going to go for it. And then again, just the adrenaline rush, all the nervousness went away. And it was powerful. It was a really wonderful thing to do. And I guess, what motivated me to do it is that, you're absolutely right when you say these people need to be held accountable. No one else is holding them accountable. AOC, Bowman, the squad, they ran as outsiders. They said, we're going to oppose the war. And I think, AOC, when she was campaigning, had listed, being anti-war on her website. And I think after she deleted it or something. So it just shows you what frauds these people are. And
once she got the money, she deleted it. Yeah.
Exactly. And, we're not hyperbolizing when we say, your actions are going to lead us to nuclear war. I mean, we're in the greatest crisis, basically since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And, at least we had someone, we had a leader then. We had John F. Kennedy, and he had the prescience to actually negotiate with Khrushchev to bring an end to what could have been a complete catastrophe. We don't have that right now. The Biden administration is not that. So people actually need to stand up. They need to hold their leaders accountable. Otherwise, who knows if we're even going to survive this winter. So I'd say that's what motivated me to do it.
Good for you. And Jose, do you want to kind of tell your journey, how you got about what happened? And then also I saw there was a little blurb I saw on one thing where security so Jose, if you could kind of talk about that.
Yeah, sure. For me, it was, because trying to figure out where I should even put the video. In other words, like, how should I cut this up? Because it goes on for another minute or so. When you see the guy at the end come up to me, we weren't the only people there to protest her. There were a bunch of like MAGA hat wearing Republicans there who were just there to kind of yell at her. And the way I decided to kind of do this was I told Kynan, okay, let's wait till she finishes her presentation, because if we do it now, she has a script and she can ignore anything we're saying, and she can just move on like it didn't happen. But in her presentation, she was talking about immigration, and then the Republicans were like, oh, what about the border? Blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And then and then she said something about gun control. And then the Republicans then again in the crowd went like haywire. And honestly, that did ease tensions a bit, I think, for myself and Kynan, to know that we weren't the first to kind of have to break the tension to heckle. Somebody else already was doing it. Kynan just stood up and did his thing, and then I followed along, because what you don't hear is she says we need to be respectful of our neighbors, and then I say, well, there will be no neighbors if there's a nuclear bomb. That's why I say that. And basically at the end, this like Trump guy comes up to me and he says, hermano, like, hey, you gotta calm down, like, I like what you're saying. But then security came in and they said, come on, sir, you have to go. You're being a nuisance. You have to go. And I say, okay.
Yeah. Nuisance.
Yeah. Okay. And I said, hold on. Okay, well, what if I promise to be quiet and sit there? I said, no, you wasted our time too much. Come on, you got to go. No,
go. Yeah. They just don't want to send.
Yeah, they don't know. And so, AOC, I mean, she didn't even, she only responded today, which I know we'll get to. So I don't want to get ahead of the program here, but and also I do want to give props. I the third guy there, yes, he'll remain unnamed, but it was his camera work that really did bring this together, because like, I didn't even tell him any direction. I just said, hey, can you just record this? He's like, okay. And he's just like got the crowd. He made it all dramatic. I was like, whoa, all right, well thank you.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, do you have a question? Because one of the things you said that was very poignant, that a lot of people resonated with, so many people, besides obviously, the fear, the visceral fear of dying in a war, was you talked about, you supported her. You supported AOC. So talk to me about how you went from supporting AOC and what happened to make you not want to. Like, what was the final straw for you?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, it was a personal thing, because, people were pulling up my old tweets where I said I was a 2-time Trump voter. And of course, AOC was elected in 2018, Trump won in 2016. So it's like, how could you have believed in AOC if you were a Trump voter in 2016? And I do kind of just want to clear that up. I'm not like a MAGA hat wearing Trump lughead, as I call him. And no offense to Trump supporters. I'm just personally not like that. I'm not out in the streets, MAGA, MAGA. That's not me. I voted for him because I hated the other guy more. And I think a lot of Americans felt the same way too. It's like, well, I certainly don't want Hillary. Trump is, but Hillary is a fucking warmonger. So, that was my rationale both times. Anyway, in 2018, I was actually going through something. I live in the Bronx. I still live in the Bronx. I lived in a section of the Bronx called Morris Heights. And my apartment had flooded. Basically, sewage water leaked in the ceiling, and I lived in a basement apartment, and then it all just crashed down. And it was like 3 days constantly sewage water coming down. I was mopping it up. I did not sleep at all. I went to my councilman, and my councilman at first got HPD there, Housing Preservation and Development. But then the next day, his chief of staff tells me, listen, what if somebody came to you with 10 or $15,000 to let all this go? It's like, what do you mean? He said, well, you're talking about suing them and you want to do all this change in this district, but take the W, take the money, and then use it to go back to school or something. Because I had dropped out of school. I was supposed to re-enroll. I didn't re-enroll at this point because of the apartment thing. I mean, I was trying to figure out what the hell I'm gonna do for housing. And so I felt hopeless because my councilman, the local government you're supposed to go to, supposed to help you, didn't help me. And so this was August, and AOC had just won her primary in June of 2018. So, July, August is all this press, and New York State or New York City is like really a blue. If you win the primary, you're winning the election. That's just how it's just going to happen. That's how it works, right? And so I emailed her campaign at the time. I was like, listen, you just won the primary. You can see the email. I put it up on Twitter. And I said, at the end of it, I tell her the story. I sent her the local media coverage. And I said, listen, you say, I don't know what to believe, but if you are who you say you are, then you'll help me with this. And I didn't get a response back. And I mean, I'll give her the credit. Maybe she was busy, maybe everybody had similar stories. Sure, fine. But I needed somebody's help and she didn't help me. That was still fine with me. Like I said, I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. But when she got into Congress, she's done nothing but be a part of the establishment. Okay. There is no Medicare for all. Okay. There is no free college tuition. All of it was a fantasy to get her protected. But honestly, I don't blame her because, like I said, I like to think that in her, there is a person. There is the Alex from the Bronx who really does want to change something. And I like to think that, in order for her to get by in the Congress and in the swamp, she needed to become this evil person she is today in order to get by because somebody told her something. And she just said, damn, I got to put aside my morals and my feelings because this is how government is and there's nothing I can do about it. So, yeah, that's...
And so here we are. Okay, before we move on to the next session, Kynan, I just wanted to check in with you. What was your kind of tipping point with leaving the support of the squad, or were you never even supportive of them?
Well, I wouldn't say I was a part of the squad. I mean, I really only got involved in politics like maybe 3 years ago. So I really never had a chance to consider, whether I had liked her when she was originally running. And by that point, I was already watching people, like Jimmy Dore, and other real progressive voices who were basically calling out for, her being a fraud. So I never really had that view of her. I mean, I know the fact that she even won, I wasn't really supposed to happen, her being an outsider, but yeah, I never really had that background.
Okay. So now we move forward to, there was definitely, it went viral online. AOC made a couple snarky tweets about how rude you both were, right? To dare to question her at a public town meeting. And instead of, what I noticed was typical things. Now remember, as maybe know a little bit about my background, I came forward about Joe Biden because I worked for him in the US Senate. And in 1993, he sexually assaulted me. And I reported it to the Senate. I reported it to the police more recently, but in 1993, I went through Senate protocol, did not receive help. I received threats and was silenced. And pretty much my career was over once I started that process. And in 2019, when I decided to come forward, because Lucy Flores had spoken up among 7 other women, and she was a young politician and was getting smeared online, I went ahead and told my story tentatively, very scared to do so, and then told the whole history by 2020. And immediately the media just attacked me relentlessly. Before I went public, I went to AOC. I did similar to what Jose did. I actually emailed her office, even though I wasn't a constituent, and said that I wasn't, but I had worked for the US Senate, US Congress as a Democrat, been in congressional races. Silence. She started out, she was one of the only politicians that mentioned my allegations during the presidential campaign. But as soon as Joe Biden was the candidate, she then did a word salad about my history with him, never called me, never contacted me. I had several people reach out for me. I tried every which way to Sunday to reach AOC and Bernie Sanders and Dianne Feinstein and, as a matter of fact, Kamala Harris. No one responded to me. And it wasn't like I was some Yahoo from the internet, right? I was a person that worked on the Hill extensively and had been part of the Democratic Party extensively. And they subbed me because I was inconvenient and the Trump derangement syndrome that, of course, was going on. So flash forward to now, I've been smeared. In fact, today there was another hit piece about me saying that my story was debunked, which it never has been, because lo and behold, Joe Biden has never even been investigated. So I want to talk about, first of all, if you could talk about her response publicly in her tweets. And then also today, Erin Mate shot back at her Instagram. And Reef, if you could throw up that Instagram thing that she put about you all. And the reason I wanted to bring all this up is I wanted you all to have a point of reference, why I feel strongly about coming forward about AOC. This is the most important thing, as Jose said, is that we're facing nuclear annihilation. So Reith, can you put up that Instagram?
You got it.
Okay. So Reith, could you go ahead and read it out loud?
Here, let's do that so the audience can hear me. AOC accuses her anti-war protesters of parroting pro-Putin talking points. She has nothing to say about Biden's rejection of diplomacy, nor explains how the squad approved billions of dollars in weapons will help end the war. She instead invokes Ukraine's self-determination. End quote.
Okay, so Jose, start with you, and then Kynan, what is your response to her calling you Putin puppets?
It's true, actually, people were going through my personal Reddit account, and they found a post where 2 years ago I posted for a language exchange. There's like an R for R language. I was like, hey, if somebody can teach me Russian, and I'm proud to say I know like 6 phrases in Russian. So, ya говорите по-русски, and so. Yeah. I guess that's enough for Putin to want to pay me in rubles, but no. The thing about being called a Putin puppet just shows she has nothing. It really just shows her impotence. She doesn't know what she's talking about. First of all, to be called like a Putin puppet and to have Putin talking points already says you're not even going to bother to think about what we say because you're X or you're Y. And I think if you think about the time from Wednesday, right, to today, she didn't say anything about it. The only thing she put out was that we were speaking over a deaf constituent, and then she deflected to something else that happened in the town hall where somebody said, oh, well, you have $27 million. And she said, oh, isn't that ridiculous, guys? Ha, that town hall was so silly. And then you see the fact that today she put out a statement. It's because I think somebody told her at first, hey, listen, don't address it. Now somebody said, okay, you got to address it because she's getting her butt kicked. And she put out this stupid statement where she's basically just saying, well, we're right-wing Trumpers, we're LaRouche cult members. It's these are words that kind of get people to tune out and be like, oh, okay, that's what that was. Got it. I don't even care what they say. But I think as Aaron Matei said in the thread, it's not about individuals. Okay. It's about what we said that matters. It doesn't matter who we are. Okay. Yeah. I don't care. The biggest Trump supporter, okay, said the same things I said. If the point still stands, you said you were anti-war. Here you are mobilizing and sending money to Ukrainian Nazis. Okay. And does she even know about the Maidan coup? I don't know. Aaron Matei also brought that up too. And my response was like, I made this whole Twitter thread talking about like all the work I've done in the last few years. I fought against the Russian hoax. I got people like William Binney, who was, the former technical director of the National Security Agency, him and Kirk Wiebe, Ray McGovern. They've all done AMAs that I asked them to do to kind of get the word out. And we've been censored. I've made videos before, okay, talking about how the United States has funded neo-Nazis in Ukraine, how Joe Biden himself has shaken hands with Oleg Tyahnybok, the leader of the Svoboda political party. I've always been consistent. It's just that people don't understand nuance. It's to say like, oh, well, you did this once, well, then therefore that's it. And I'll just say this, I've been scrutinized publicly, my Twitter, all of my tweets since 2014 when I started the Twitter account to follow my favorite YouTubers at the time. Okay, I wasn't political. Oh, and then somebody on Reddit was like analyzing all my posts that I posted like 4 years ago about playing Magic the Gathering. They said, this is an elaborate psyop that was started 4 years ago. Okay, there's no way this person appears to be normal and then starts talking Putin propaganda. This was all, I was like, no, I just like Magic the Gathering and I'm Beethoven. And I also think that, the Ukrainian war is bullshit.
Talk about conspiracy theories.
Yeah. Kind of, what I wanted you to pipe in, because I think I saw a photo of you online where they were saying, why is he playing music or classical music? Did you see that, Kynan?
I did see that. Yeah, we were I think we were I think you're referring to the chorus in the conference on Saturday. Yeah. Right. Jose and I were a part of it, and I mean, Jose can speak about this more. I mean, we've both really been involved in singing in choruses. We come from that background because the nature of music can be political as well. It can unite people from all different kinds of backgrounds, people that have different beliefs, and you get a higher one, I think. So
Putin's your choral society, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
And I also want to address one other thing. I mean, AOC had said that, we were talking over a deaf constituent. I mean, that's completely bogus. There was an email that was actually written that the moderator, asked, and who knows if they were deaf or not, but they're making it out to be like, we were speaking over some deaf constituent, which I don't even think that really makes sense if you really think about it, So, I mean, it's a complete lie. And the fact that they're labeling us as Russian propagandists, it's disgraceful. They're acting like we can't think for ourselves. We can't come to our own conclusions.
Well, I mean, I empathize with you because when I came forward, the first thing they called me, Edric Isaac Jovier from The Atlantic, called me a Russian asset, a Russian agent. Then I was called all kinds of things. Then there was a whole Reddit thread about if I was a time traveling honey trap or something like that, Russian agent. And from when I was in my 20s, it's bizarre. And then, to add to that, of course, I've been attacked over and over again. And New York Times said that when they were investigating my story, the reporter said that the first response she got from the Joe Biden's campaign was simply to fax to them my position about Russia. that I had written on a blog. And I was writing a novel, by the way, but they took pieces out of it and decided that I was a Putin puppet, if you will. And so this tells us a lot, right? It's switch and bait. That's what it's called. So the conversation then switches from what we're talking about, which is the fear of nuclear annihilation and to stop funding endless wars, to trying to defend activists trying to defend themselves and you trying to defend yourself, that you're not, acting for another foreign national government. So I guess my next question, and Jose, I'm going to throw this at you. Has this silenced you or has this emboldened you to do more activist work? Because we are facing nuclear annihilation, possibly. So what is this doing to your politics and how are you responding?
This only emboldens me, I guess. I mean, it's not the first time that I've done something like this. I did it to, well, actually, Kamala wasn't even the first one. I did this to Adriano Espaillat back in 2019, I think, or it was either January or February of 2020. He was doing some kind of veterans event. And I stood up right there. Basically, he was having this dinner with veterans. And I said, he was thanking this veteran here, that person here. And I stood up, I said, "You forgot Victoria Nuland." And he's like, "Oh, how could I forget Victoria Nuland? Yeah. And then everybody argued, yeah, okay. Because your Congress voted to send money to Ukrainian Nazis through her. She orchestrated, and then that made the local news. And I have a recording of that somewhere. I don't know where I put it. I didn't think to put it on social media at the time. This was all pre-pandemic politics. So things were a little different back then. But then I did the thing with Kamala, which I think was like a year ago today. I think, I wish this had the date on it. My ex-girlfriend got me this frame, where I made the headline for confronting Kamala Harris. You can do better. And so,
you've got to do better. And so do you feel afraid now? Do you feel targeted by the federal government, or do you feel like, no, they're allowing dissent? We're not there yet. We're not there like some other countries. Like, for instance, I had an interview with Alina Lip, who all she did was interview some people in Donbass, and she is now facing prison in Germany up to 3 years, and her bank account was frozen, and her parents. Yeah. So are you fearful that we're in that direction in the US, or do you, where do you see this going?
I am not fearful at all. First of all, I feel like I've been unshackled because I had this girlfriend who was like very non-political. And when the intervention happened, she just like said, "Hey, I gotta go." And I was like, you know what? Fine. I got nothing holding me back now. And the fear of the FBI. Look, I'm part of the LaRouche organization, just to be like straightforward with you. They have a history of being targeted by the CIA and the FBI. Lyndon LaRouche went to jail unjustly. They've written so many slanders of him. They call him different things, anti-Semitic, racist, but they never talk about his ideas. It's this idea of, well, Lyndon LaRouche is bad, but we can't tell you why, and in that tradition, okay, if he stood up and he went to jail, so can I. Okay, I am not afraid of whatever they'll do to me because I know who I'm with. I'm with the LaRouche organization, and that gives me a certain power. I am unafraid, and that's why I'm not afraid to put my identity out there and be scrutinized if that's the price that needs to be paid. I will say I will really appreciate it if other people start standing up so I can get the attention away from me a bit, just so this seems to be a movement, because that's what it needs to be at this point. It can't just be, oh, these guys did these things. No, it's a message for you, to whoever's watching this right now. You need to stand up wherever you are in the country or wherever you are in the world, because you see these protests going on in Europe, in France, in Germany. They're trying to say stop. In Italy too, there was a big one in Italy today, a protest like get NATO, or stop funding NATO. You need to stand up right now. I'm not asking anymore. Okay, I'm not saying you got to choose. No. That was a mistake I made with AOC. I said, if you choose to, no, you got it. It's no longer of choosing anymore, all right? And so do not be afraid, okay? Because the more of us that stand up, they're not going to go after all of us. They're just not. It's too many people if you all stand up, so.
Yeah, there's more of us than there is of them, right? And this is a crucial time. If there's a hill to die on, it's prevention of nuclear annihilation, right? It's to prevent a war with China or Russia. I mean, that is huge. And the other one is, of course, free Julian Assange, which I feel strongly about, because Julian gave his freedom and perhaps his life because of the slow motion execution they're doing in public, giving us the information that our government had been lying for years, and taking us into these these wars and these proxy wars. And speaking of Victoria Nuland, he exposed that. But also, most people think this Ukraine war started in February, but it did not. It started right in 2014, and even before that, right, 8 years ago. So here we are. So Kynan, I wanted to ask you, and actually Jose too, one of you got your Twitter suspended or you got put in Twitter jail. Which one of you? Was that you, Jose?
Yeah, it was me. I got put into Twitter jail because 2 years ago, actually, our people did something similar to AOC, where they said we got to eat the babies. I don't know if you might remember this, but yeah, basically one of our protesters was in her town hall and said, listen, climate change is a really big deal, and I'm afraid. So I just think that these policies don't go far enough. I think we need to start eating babies to stop climate change, because the population will get out of control. So we have to eat the babies. So this went also stupid viral 2 years ago. And I had made a meme that had a picture of a baby. And the caption was "Green New Meal," because
Oh, okay.
I made that 2 years ago. People stole it, and it was reposted everywhere. And then all of a sudden, I get I go back on my Twitter, and it says, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! One of your tweets broke the rules." And I was ready to be like, "Is it my intervention? I'm ready to stand up." And then it says, "Nope, it's the Green New Meal meme." I'm like, really? This is the thing they're gonna? So I was like, yeah.
So they dug through all until they could find one. Okay.
I guess that's how the tactic works. Yeah. And so I just said, you know what? It's a stupid meme anyway. I'll delete it. I delete it, and it's like, okay, you'll get it back in 12 hours. It's like, what? I did what you asked. I'm not a child. I don't need to be put in time out, so, but that was done intentionally. That was done intentionally because this was so that I wouldn't respond to AOC, who, while I was in Twitter jail, had this whole deflection of well, the other thing that happened at the town hall was this, it's like, fuck. So
Kynan, what did anything happen to you, or have you been targeted in any way, or are things going okay?
No, everything is good. Thankfully it's good for me now, although there are, obviously a lot of trolls. There's this NAFO operation, which I think people talk about, of these Ukrainian trolls.
Cat. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know, and it's obnoxious, but I'm not gonna go crazy over it. But I wanted to emphasize one thing that Jose touched upon, which is the influence of LaRouche in our lives. And I mean, the thing to note with him, I mean, he had constantly fought for a new, just world economic order. I mean, essentially since the 1970s, when he started this organization, his organization, and the idea was to get nations to cooperate around the idea of development, of building infrastructure in, undernourished areas, of eliminating poverty, of eliminating food insecurity, and you talk about, this war danger. And I mean, the war danger and the financial collapse which we're experiencing are not separate from one another, So Helga LaRouche, who, is his wife, she has made this call that we need a new international security architecture on the policies that LaRouche fought for all his life. And we need to work with Russia on this. We need to work with China on this. We need to work with Ukraine on this. And this is the only thing that's actually going to get us out of the war, and which is going to start this new paradigm. I mean, you see China and Russia doing their thing with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, with the BRICS organization, and they're giving the global South and other nations what they want. They want their own development. So I think if the United States stops being so egotistical and basically dictating to other nations what they want, giving them democracy, I think we should realize what their priorities are. We need to eliminate poverty. We need to give them technological development. And that's the solution concept in which we fight for, Jose and I.
Okay, well, great. You know, I want to put it out there to my audience. If you want to ask questions or say something in the chat, now's the time. Right now, kind of get in there, because I'm going to ask Reade to raise up a couple questions, and for Jose and for Kynan. And you know, I really think that we are at a crossroads, right? As not just a nation, but a world, because the world is becoming multipolar, whether the US officials like it or not. So we can either choose to cooperate with that and let go of the unipolar vision, or, you know, it's ending up the way it is. We're just in a constant state of tension and fear, and you know, the only people that are benefiting are the predator class and the military industrial complex that manufacture the weapons, you know, because definitely the soldiers don't. I mean, like, the soldiers are being told to go on food stamps, right? So, you know, it's not as if the military is valued in the US anyway. The military soldiers, I mean. And so Reade, do you have any questions or comments from the audience?
There you go. I know people probably want to know. It hasn't been asked yet, but I know Colin was going to. I don't know if Jose, you know Colin. He was the one who asked AOC, what about the 10% during the eviction moratorium? One of those people that like to stand up, but he probably wants to know, and I feel like AOC touched on it in her response on Insta, that, you know, as far as their comments about Tulsi Gabbard has voted for more defense budget increases than I ever have. That kind of thing. How do you feel like, I think the question is going to be how you feel like Tulsi is anti-war, you know? That's probably what people would like to ask.
Well, I mean, I just take her comments at face value. She just did this thing where she said, you know, she's leaving the Democratic Party, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're anti-warmongers. And I know she said the other stuff about being anti-woke and stuff. Personally, for me, like the woke stuff, the anti-woke stuff, to me, I could care a little less about that. It is a problem, in my opinion, for other reasons that we can talk about. And also her comments on Joe Rogan too, where she really went into about how, yeah, listen, we're on the verge of thermonuclear war. And so she probably did vote for budget increases for the defense budget to go up. That's probably true. But I don't care about what people have done in the past. We have to look at where we are right now, because I think no matter what you believe, whether you think Putin is this like egotistical maniac who decided to invade Ukraine and this started in February, or if you know the history of Ukraine and you know that the Maidan coup was 2014 and that was a US-backed coup, you have to realize we are on the point of nuclear war. It doesn't matter what you think. That's where you are. That's where we all are right now. And Tulsi Gabbard is saying, this has gone too far. I'm leaving my party. That's an act of courage as far as I'm concerned. Mm-hmm. And that's why, and it's see, that's the thing, right? Tulsi's unpopular to from left-wing circles to say that, right? AOC is not. And if AOC came out against the war, I know there would be more people supporting her, okay, than there are yelling at her, right? But they give up these faux polls of like, well, you know, 7 out of 10 Americans support the Ukrainian funding. It's like bullshit, you know?
No, they don't.
Yeah, no, people can't pay their gas bills right now. People can't pay their electric bills right now. People can't pay for fucking groceries, okay? Oh, but wait, here's $50 billion for Ukraine. We can maybe cancel $10,000 of your student debt, maybe, only if it wasn't a private loan, and not all of it either, but Ukrainians another 12 billion, no problem. We got it. And that's what I brought up in my intervention with Jamal Bowman, because the week before, or 2 weeks before I did this with AOC, I did the same thing with Jamal Bowman. And as his people are escorting me out, I scream out and say, where's the $50 billion for the Bronx? So.
Ooh. Now, did Jamal, because I saw on the video that he said, I'll talk to you later, brother. I'll talk to you after. So did he ever talk to you?
He did actually talk to me. And in the interim, it was about 30 minutes or so between him ending his town hall and then him coming up to me. I was talking to his office about something else, actually. There's a prisoner named Marlo Blocker who's in Upstate Correctional Facility. That's the name of the place. And at the time, he was doing a hunger strike and a water strike because they took away his water, they took away his bed, they took away his clothes, his blankets. So he had no water, no food, no mattress, no blankets. And his toilet was overflowed, so like he couldn't even use that. And I was talking to his office about like, hey, listen, like, you know, Bowman has said he cares about prisoners' rights. Like, okay, we don't have to, you know, agree on this Nazi thing, but before I talk to him, I just got to let you guys know this. So then he came up to me and he's like, whoa, what's going on? What was that about, brother? And, you know, I said, listen, you know, I wouldn't have done it that way if you had taken questions, because these town halls are fixed in such a way that they don't really take questions. Like for the AOC town hall, you had to pre-write your question, okay, before you sat down in the audience. If you had a question, you had to write it down, okay? It was like that. It was not, and the same thing with Bowman. The only other thing is that Bowman's town hall, he was with Hakeem Jeffries, who's another congressman in New York, although Jeffries is Brooklyn. And by the way, Jeffries put out a letter denouncing anti-Semitism in Ukraine in 2013. Anyway, they were supposed to take questions. They did not take questions, okay? And when Bowman said, well, we're coming to the conclusion now, I was like, fuck, I gotta have to stand up, aren't I? And so the first thing he asked me was, or the first thing that I said was like, listen, you know, I wouldn't have done this if you had asked questions. And he said, first of all, where are you from? I was like, well, I'm from the South Bronx. So you're not even in my district. Okay, you're not even my constituent. Why didn't you talk about this with Richie Torres, okay, who's your guy? You know, and I said, well, you know, I tried to talk, and he said, and then you didn't have to yell at me like that. You know, you didn't have to come up to me and yell at me. You could have pulled me to the side. You know, we could have talked about this. And I said, you know, you're
feelings about you being, again, about their approach. First of all, they make themselves so insulated, you can't ask them a question. You can't approach them. Like AOC has layers and layers and layers of people before you can get a message to her. And so the only thing you can do is do a public tweet or do a public shout out to these people. And then they criticize you if you criticize them. You know what? And this is the thing, and I want the audience to hear this, because we're just in this upside down world where these people think that we work for them. You know what? They work for us. Vote them out. Vote them all out.
Yeah.
Dem exit, you know, Democratic exit. And I am sick and tired of them, you know, switch and baiting the whole conversation. So instead of talking to you about substantive matters, basically Jamal just focused on the fact, well, you yelled at me, you know, whatever. Like, he's a politician. He's doing his job. Like, and it, you know, politics, let's face it, especially geopolitics, it's a blood sport. And now we're at the edge of like annihilation. And so as human beings, we should be allowed some anger, some frustration with these endless wars they put them in. I mean, like, I'm older than you. I'm probably twice your ages, right?
I'm 24,
and
yeah.
I have watched the war to war to war to war through my lifetime. Doesn't matter who's president. You know, I voted for Barack Obama thinking this was going to be different. Ends up he does drone strikes on civilians. Ends up he's just as much of a warmonger as George W. Bush, you know, and Bush Sr. So, you know, anyway, that's my rant. Hey, Reef, do you have some more questions? Don't go on a monologue here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So besides working on Diane's campaign, are you two interested in supporting anti-war Green Party candidate U.S. Senate, maybe like Matthew Ho or Delilah for Texas, or any of those people, if you guys want to comment?
And I'm start because you didn't get a chance to speak there. So Kynan first, and then Jose.
Yeah, I'd be willing to work with anyone really who's, you know, arguing against this question of thermonuclear war, because I think it's the most prescient issue we're facing right now in the history of mankind. So I think any candidate that, you know, is running on that issue, I'd be more than happy to work with them and to talk to them about what I do. And, you know, Jose was talking about the way these town halls are set up. It's completely ridiculous. You know, I mean, when I went into the AOC town hall, before they let us in, they had us write a question on a piece of paper, and someone would take them all, and they would pre-select which questions they were going to ask, and that's so ridiculous. You can't call that democracy if you're not answering everyone's questions in that room. And I think it was even worse for Jamal no, it was actually Gillibrand, which Jose intervened against. I think you had to write the questions, and then they would fish them out of like this fishbowl, and whoever's question they took out, they would ask that. I mean, what is that? So people are saying, why do we have to shout out against these people? Well, that's why, because they're not going to answer our questions unless we actually demand that they do so.
And that's the point. And I'll tell you what, and I'm ashamed to say this, but you know what? I'm going to be truthful with my audience because it is the truth. When I worked as a on congressional races, I did some of those town halls. I also worked for a state senator. We would literally write down, campaign staffers, we would write down the questions and answers, and we would stack the audience, and we would get certain constituents to submit their questions. And those were the ones that got called on. This happened on radio shows. This happened on media. This was part of the job. And I was young and I thought this was normal, but it never felt right. It felt deceptive. And then when I started calling it out or questioning it, I got a lot of pushback. But what are your thoughts on that, Jose, and answering the question that the audience member asked about Matthew Ho, who actually off the ticket?
Yeah, no, first of all, Tara, wow. I mean, I kind of suspected that, but it's not something I could say I ever knew per se. Mm-hmm. It's kind of one of these things that you think but now you just confirmed it. So, it's like, of course, if that was happening back when you was doing it, I'm sure it's way worse now than it was.
You got more sophisticated now.
Listen, I mean, I'll give an example. Jeff Young, who's out in Kentucky, right? He had this poster that said abolish the CIA. And he won the Democratic primary against Andy Barr, right? I don't agree with Jeff on a lot of things, okay? On a lot of things. But you know what? He's come on our platform. He's on the same kill list that Diane's on. And he's been speaking out against nuclear war and against all these stupid neocons, both on the left and right. And that is why I respect the man. And frankly, I want to be around to disagree with him, okay? I want to be around to fight with these people on various issues, because if there's a nuclear war, the only thing we're going to be fighting about is rations, okay? Who gets to eat what, when, and where? And that's my stance. So whoever wants to do it, Matthew Ho, whoever the hell, if you stand against nuclear war and you're willing to speak out against people like AOC and the quote squad, then yeah, I'll work with you.
Good to know. Good to know. And it's interesting because Matthew Ho went through a lot. He had to go to court because the Democratic Party took him off the ticket, and he had to go to court, and he won. But yeah, there's quite an uphill battle for an independent candidate to get on the ticket. So for our audience member, could you define the kill list? Because there may be some people who don't know what the Ukraine kill list is. I've had guests on my show talking about it, but why don't you go ahead and talk about Diane being on it and what you know?
Yeah, sure. Kynan might actually learn a little bit more about it than I do. Kynan?
All right, let Kynan answer this. Okay, Kynan, go.
Sure. Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it. I mean, so in July of this year, there was this organization called the Center for Countering Disinformation. They're based in Ukraine, and they're a part of the security apparatus there. And they had released this blacklist. It contained at the time 70 individuals. Now it has over 90. And these were people that they claimed were promoting narratives consonant with Russian propaganda. The usual stuff. They're Putin puppets. And I should mention over 30 of those people were associated or are members of the Schiller Institute, Diane Sare being, among them. And what were these people calling for? What were they, what was the propaganda they were calling for? They wanted peace in Ukraine. They wanted a peaceful negotiated settlement. They wanted to avoid nuclear war. They were going against the sanctions, which are now killing people in Europe. They're going to freeze the winter because of this, So that's why they were put on the list, and it's crazy. And Scott Ritter, who you're probably familiar with,
He's on my show. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great. Diane Sare's been collaborating with him. He had published an article in Consortium News, basically saying that these blacklists, they often turn into kill lists. And we know what kind of people are fighting these Russians in the Ukrainian military, literal neo-Nazis, So with a list like this going out, there's absolutely no reason not to believe that some crazy guy is going to go out and kill one of these people. And that's been proven with Daria Dugina, the daughter of Alexander Dugin, who was blown up in this car bomb. And you probably saw it, the New York Times basically admitted that it was Ukraine behind this, and they were trying to get rid of their involvement as well, So yeah, that's what's going on with this list. And the fact that you have a Senate candidate, Diane Sare, who's on it, and Chuck Schumer, as Scott Ritter pointed out in his article, he had actually appropriated funds to go to employees in the Ukrainian government, employees in the Center for Countering Disinformation being among them. So imagine that. You have Chuck Schumer, a man in the Senate, who's actually funding opposition against his own opponent. It's insane. And we've been getting this out there. We've had, people on our platform, people like Eva Bartlett, who's been covering the situation in the Donbass.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's on the hit list. And it just needs to get out.
She was killed a month ago. She was, I think it was Louise Mensch had done a Twitter and attached her location for Ukraine military. And she's on, by the way, and she's been very vocal about the website, the Kill List website, in case my audience didn't catch that show. And 2 days later, her hotel was bombed. She didn't happen to be there and she survived. This just happened last week to Wyatt Reade. He was almost killed as well, and he's on the list. He'd been on the list. All he did was on a WhatsApp tell his location. An hour later, his hotel was bombed. He had just gotten there. So this website's real. And I know that you and Jose are involved with trying to shut it down. Are you getting any talk from the Hill, any member of Congress, anyone talking about, working with you all to shut this kill list down?
Well, I can't say too much. But because of the intervention we did with Gillibrand, that was that August or September? I think it was August. We did get an invite to go to the Hill to speak with somebody pretty prominent in her office, and that's really all I can say on that. And that it was almost strictly about the kill list and how this money, that $50 billion was sent to Ukraine, was being used to fund the CDC. Although what's funny is that the day after I was in Washington, the Azov Battalion was invited to Washington to speak in Washington. And I was like flabbergasted. I was like, what? We had to,
is that they were like normalizing us seeing Nazis and humanizing them, right?
Yeah, and they were there to ask for more money, because I think this was around the time when they were talking about the Donbass, Lugansk, and the other Kherson and the other region to become a part of Russia. This was when the Azov started freaking out, and so they had sent their representatives to the Hill, and they were getting meetings with different senators and congressmen. I was like, what the fuck? I had to do so much work for one meeting with this one guy, a constituent, okay, of New York, of this country, and here comes some uppity foreigner, okay, who's not born here, not from here, gets full access to the Congress and Senate. What the fuck? I'm pissed off about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can see as a US citizen, that's enraging that you can't talk to your own representatives. I mean, that alone, it tells you everything. It's like once they get what they need, which is our votes, then they just walk away, right? And this war, this proxy war we're fighting, there's been no consent from the US citizens. And I've been trying to tell people, I tried to tell people in 2020, Joe Biden doesn't ask for consent. I'm the poster child for that. So we're coming up, you know what? Reef, I need your help with telling me the time because I'm, because of the internet thing. What? Okay. Do we have Diane in the house? Okay. I'm going to all audience members, please look in the notes here. And I want to thank Indy and Reef again, INN, for helping me get this podcast out. Jose and Kynan, thank you for being so generous with your time. You both are so amazing. When I watched your your shouting out AC at least like 10 times. I know other people were saying the same thing. It felt so good. Even though we didn't do the shouting, you did. It felt so good to have somebody stand up and say something. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So any parting thoughts you want to leave us before we bring on Diane?
Kynan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think the last thing I'd like to say is I encourage everyone, wherever you are in the country, to do exactly what we just did, because these people need to be held accountable. Just find out where your congressman is speaking, find out where they're hosting these town halls, and go and interrupt them. Tell them that they're leading us to nuclear war, because they're responsible for it. And that, I think, was the point of our intervention, to inspire people, because they need to be inspired. So that's what I'd like to leave you with. Thank you.
And for me, check out Diane Sare. I'm really happy she's going to be speaking out after us, because if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here right now. I wouldn't think the way I do. I wouldn't do the things I do. And I'm immensely proud to be on Diane's campaign. And I am immensely proud to be associated with Diane. And everybody needs to stand up, look for your elected officials, and just harass them in a positive way. Do not take this as me saying do anything violent. We are nonviolent creative action and love and agape, okay? If you love humanity, you will stand up and call out these politicians, okay? From love, from a standpoint of love. So that's what I'll say.
Thank you, Jose, because love, actually might save humanity from what we're facing, because it does feel like an epic struggle between good and evil. And I'm usually not binary on that, but it does feel that way. Thank you for everything you're doing. And so for people that want to contact Jose and Kynan, please look below. You can message me. Could you, Jose, just shout out real quick your Twitter handle, just so people have it in social media?
Yeah, sure. It's Hosb Trigga, JOSBTRIGGA. I made it when I was in high school. Hosb, because Jose was taken. And there you go. There it is. Yeah. Thank you so much. That's right. My social right there.
Thank you, Kynan. Thank you, Jose. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you again. So come back on the show, stay in touch, and we'll see you soon.
You'll see me for 2024 Congress. I'll be running against Richie Torres. Okay. I hate that guy so much. He is an Israel apologist. He gets so much money from them. He's done nothing for the South Bronx. Okay. I'm sorry. That's my parting thoughts.
No, that's okay. I'm excited. We need young people running. We don't need fossils in the U.S. Senate and U.S. Congress. So thank you. So we'll look for you running for Congress in 2024. But first, let's make it to 2024. All right. Take care. God bless. Take care. See you next time.
We'll be right back.
All right. Diane, we'll be right back. Okay, audience members, stay tuned. We've got Diane Sare in the house. She's waiting.
Legend says that Hercules swept Cerberus right off his feet and effortlessly set him down softly as a songbird. Atlas kept the world upon his back and every day wondered whether he could stand it any longer. And Tara Reade came out to say the man they tried to label the messiah of morality was really just another rapist. And I don't intend to hesitate when asked who was the stronger. Tara, like Assange, knew that carrying the truth would be the hardest labor. Tara knew that her assailant wasn't gonna make us any safer, and knew he's just the type of man to hand a decent foreign leader US printed walking papers.
Welcome back, audience, to the Politics of Survival. I'm your host, TheTaraReade, and thank you for staying tuned for our extended version of our show tonight. It was so wonderful to have Jose Vega and Kynan, because their activism and calling out AOC was so invigorating, and because we need to hold our representatives accountable and responsible when they are not representing the people. So I have someone else who is running for political office who is going to try to make some changes, and she'll tell us all about her platform and who she is and what she represents. And so without further ado, I have the US Senate candidate for New York, Diane Sare. Welcome, Diane. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. So go ahead. I hope you're going to ask me something, because otherwise I don't know where to start.
Well, I mean, it was a very invigorating conversation that I had with one of the people working on your campaign and activists that are working on your campaign. So let's start with this. Just basically who you are and where, all about, because my audience is from all over the world, actually, not just from, regional. So if you could tell them where you're running, who you're running against, and why, and what drew you to that. Start with that.
Sure. All right. Well, I am a trained classical musician, grew up in a Quaker household, and when I was a student at New England Conservatory, I ran into the then presidential campaign of Lyndon LaRouche, who had already been indicted by Robert Mueller, who had developed this, what stupidly became known as Star Wars, but the Strategic Defense Initiative, which LaRouche's idea was you develop laser beams that can shoot down nuclear missiles so that you can actually end nuclear war, that you have a defensive technology that supersedes the nuclear technology, and then you have a basis for people to draw down their nuclear warheads, and that the only way this would work is for the US and the Soviet Union to do it simultaneously together. And Reagan liked that idea. He adopted it. LaRouche became his back channel to negotiate with the Soviets. The Soviets rejected it. And they did so because they said, we saw what happened in the United States when you had the Apollo project. For every dollar you spent going to the moon, you got $14 back in microwave ovens and cell phones and, all Teflon and Velcro and all of these things, so that your physical economy massively expanded and became more robust, where the Soviet economy would not do that. They had super advanced investments in military, but then they had farms, tractors from the 1940s. So they overwhelmingly they said, no, we're not going to take Reagan's offer on this. And LaRouche warned them. He said, if you go off on your own and try to develop this technology without the United States, you're going to cannibalize your economy. And I am warning that the Soviet Union will disintegrate within 5 years. And he was the only person, I can assure you, in 1982, 83 that was saying that, and turned out to be completely on the mark, for which, ironically, they had produced a film in the Soviet Union blaming LaRouche and associates for the assassination of Olof Palme, a huge smear campaign calling on the US to arrest LaRouche for his taxes. They didn't love him, I'll put it that way. But when the forecast was vindicated, he really earned the admiration of some of the top Russian intellectuals and developed actually a wonderful friendship with many, many top Russian scientists and economists, not least of which is one who's extremely prominent today, Sergei Glaziev, who's the head of the Eurasian Economic Union and who is designing many of the policies and who just produced a beautiful little film for the centennial of LaRouche's birth, September 8th, where he pointed out the nations that listened to LaRouche, that got their currencies under control, that put physical economy ahead of speculation, that began peaceful relations with other nations, those nations are relatively prospering, whereas the nations, I would say, like the US, that threw him in jail for 5 years and shut down his publications, and it really, in a way, presaged what happened with Julian Assange and others. The nations that took that approach are not doing very well. In fact, they're doing pretty terribly, something that I know President Biden doesn't seem to realize. He thinks we're doing better than everybody else in the world, but that's not actually the truth of the matter. So at any rate, I began organizing there. I ran for office for US Congress in 2012 and 2014 in New Jersey as a Democrat. That was a pretty hilarious campaign because I was campaigning to impeach Barack Obama, which meant that every time I walked into a Democratic Party meeting, people would start screaming and yelling and trying to figure out how to get rid of me. Then I ran as an independent against Chris Christie for governor. And, so I've been active. I also created a large community chorus in New York City after the Staten Island grand jury found that there had been no wrongdoing in the death by strangulation of Eric Garner. And I created the chorus because I realized that you had a game being played to create race riots and to create this incredible animosity between the police, on the one hand, the African-American community, and of course in New York City, actually, the police force is not majority Caucasian, actually. But at any rate, so what we didn't want to see is retribution and just crazy violence, but why not? Because justice is not revenge. So I said, we're going to organize a concert dedicated to the sanctity of every human life, that mankind has to get above violence. We can't resolve our conflicts this way. MacArthur was totally right. Once you had the nuclear bombs dropped on Japan, and it was clear to him that humanity, and by the way, he didn't even know about the nuclear bombs. He had done a naval blockade that was totally successful, and Japan was ready to surrender. This was totally unnecessary carnage. He said, mankind is going to have to grow up. We have outpaced ourselves. We are capable of annihilating the entire human species. And he said, I'm not sure culturally we're mature enough to handle that. And he called for a spiritual recrudescence. I think that's so right. And here we are again now, potentially on the brink of nuclear annihilation, because people somehow have not become human enough or matured into their human identity to realize that there are higher principles by which we could actually be united for common goals of mankind without sacrificing our sovereignty, our language, our individuality. A total agreement and conformity is not required to have peaceful prosperity.
Now, one thing that came up in the conversation before you came on with Jose is that you are named on the Ukraine military kill list. And, here you are, you're running on, for US Senate. And have you gotten any support at all from any member of Congress or people involved with mainstream media about having that website shut down, or any kind of security for your safety? Because as everyone knows, and we had discussed in the last hour, it's a very serious kill list. Have you gotten anything of the sort?
No, There was, from people who've been around the country calling the Congress, I know Representative Gosar in Arizona is the closest, where he brought up the CCD, the Ukrainian kill list, and he said, did Biden create this because he failed to get his disinformation governance board, or whatever it was called, in the US, so now he's paying Ukraine to do it. So that was the closest. Of course, I wrote to Schumer, and as you know, probably Scott Ritter, the former UN weapons inspector, whistleblower, wrote a very damning article in Consortium News about Schumer's war on free speech, saying, and Ritter wrote also to Schumer, Gillibrand, and his representative Tonko. Tonko sent a form letter back saying, here's why we have to support Ukraine. I mean, it's like he didn't even read what Ritter sent him. And then, Schumer and Gillibrand had nothing to say. I've had rallies outside his office, hand-delivered letters, nothing. And Ritter said, isn't it a little bit problematic for an incumbent US senator to be financing an organization or voting to fund an organization that places his political adversary on a list which endangers her life? And he has, so no response so far.
So has any mainstream media covered that fact or raised it up besides Scott?
Well, interestingly, Newsweek magazine did an article about Jeff Young. It was after a Reddit we did with Scott Ritter and Ray McGovern, and they covered Jeff Young, and they tried to paint him as actually a Russian propagandist, although they gave him some straight coverage. And then in the last paragraph, and I have to say, I was really hard on the reporter because I don't trust any close to mainstream media as the Newsweek is. And he said, well, what are your sources? Where do you get your information? And so I really lit into him, and I said, this isn't a matter of sources. This is a matter of reason. Maybe you don't know the history of the Cuban Missiles Crisis, but Kennedy had a problem with the Soviet Union putting nuclear missiles in Cuba. Ukraine is a lot closer to Russia than that. So it should be obvious to anyone who's thinking why this would be a security problem for us. So I really hit it very hard. And to my pleasant surprise, he quoted me straight. He didn't give me a lot of coverage, but I got a whole paragraph and it was accurate. And they quoted me talking about the danger of nuclear war. So that's the one place that there's been, and the article came about because of this kill list, which they didn't call it a kill list. They called it a whatever list, I don't know, of a list of Russian propagandists or something.
Call it a peacemakers list.
Well, the peacemakers.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
And they're actually, and then when dies, when someone's been killed, they put liquidated is the word when it's translated into English. It's horrible. And I mentioned earlier in the show, Wyatt Reade was almost killed last week, and when his hotel was bombed, and he's on that list. Ava Bartlett, Alina Lip, Patrick Lancaster's been threatened. He's on the list. But you also have Roger Waters on the list, and other like the luminaries. And I wanted people to actually, I want to kind of plug this right now. Ukraine on Fire, for those in the audience that really don't kind of know the history of the Maidan in 2014. Igor Lopotonik and Oliver Stone did wonderful documentaries. You can find it. It got taken down by YouTube and censored, but you can find it on Rumble, and you can find it other places. You can purchase it. Support those filmmakers. Igor Lopotonik was just put on the kill list a few weeks ago. Oliver Stone's on it. And, most recently, of course, Roger Waters. So what, as you're seeing this being normalized, and no response from mainstream media, when you go out and you meet constituents, do you talk about the Ukraine military kill list and that it is existence and that it needs to be shut down? Or what? Yes. What is your?
I do. Actually, the focus of my campaign so far has been, as you heard from Jose and Kynan, to avoid having a nuclear war. When I have a chance to have a longer conversation, I talk about the kill list. And I also really focus on the fact that we're arming Nazis. I mean, Stepan Bandera was not some lightweight something or other who was just trying to do good for his country.
3,000 were murdered. Yeah.
Exactly. And the fact that they renamed the road that goes by Babi Yar, where 30,000 Jews were killed under his direction, and they named it after him. This is not a subtle thing that you could miss. And I'll tell you, this story, the truth of the matter, is really leaking out, because we had a rally. I've had a couple rallies now in front of Schumer's Manhattan office. And I'm happy to say one of the days we were there, I found out he was inside, which was particularly nice. The second time we were there, it turned out we had it the same day that Biden was there raising money for the Senate re-election committee. So I feel like our timing has been excellent. And we had a 10-foot long banner that said, "Why is Schumer funding Nazis in Ukraine?"
Right.
And I expected to get a lot more freakouts when we went out with and put a little Hitler mustache on Obama because his healthcare bill wanted to kill elderly and sick people, or not, they weren't worth the money. We got people trying to beat us up, run over the table, punch us in the face, throw the lid. I mean, it was like a violent rage. So I thought, what's the response in Manhattan going to be? Here I am saying a nominally Jewish senator is supporting Nazis. Are people going to freak out, rip up the banner, punch me out? What's going to happen? Actually, we got a very open response. Mm-hmm. We didn't get freakouts. I was had a rally another day somewhere in Manhattan. I met 3 nasty people who were I was at the Columbus Day Parade. 2 people from Ukraine who just disagreed and kind of walked away. And then they sent a rage ball, probably an Azov sympathizer or something, who came over and really got in people's faces. But that was 3 people out of thousands of people at the parade. So this leads me to believe that the media running their narrative has cowed people. Don't express what they know, but if you tell the truth, they know that it is the truth, and they're open to it. And that's why I do think we're perhaps on the cusp of breaking this thing open.
Well, there's a lot of people that would say that it's $80 billion collectively that's gone to Ukraine, and there's just been no accounting for it. But a lot of people now, I think, are waking up to the fact that this is a money laundering scheme. In my opinion, it's money laundering, the biggest grift there is. And, could you talk a little bit about the fact that John Kerry's child, Nancy Pelosi's, and Joe Biden's were all on the board of Burisma and getting money? Isn't that, because you were a candidate, isn't that a form of nepotism and corruption?
It certainly looks that way. I think it's certainly warrants an investigation. I also think people should remember how Trump got impeached the first time. He threatened to cut off weapons to Zelensky. Why is that such a crime? Worth thinking about.
So, and what is your reception when you go to your rallies and you're going and you're talking to people? Are you getting more and more people trying to find out more about your platform and trying to engage with you?
Yes. I mean, I just spoke at tonight. I'll tell you, my schedule, I'm happy to say, is totally insane. And there are groups that seem to be open, but they're not really quite open. Like I did a candidates questioning event where they said, this was an African-American organization in one of the boroughs. I don't want to say the details because I'm going to say something that's not very nice about them, or it doesn't put them in a good light. I'm telling the truth, but it doesn't put them in a good light. And I thought, oh, isn't this nice? They actually want to have a candidates forum where they hear from everyone. And they said, we've changed. And I have to tell you, I think that everyone is scared out of their pants about my candidacy, because it seems like everything I touch, all debate is shut down. Like I had in the state of New York, you get to have an emblem next to your party organization. The Republicans have the elephant, the Democrats have the donkey, Libertarians have the Statue of Liberty. I chose to have a treble clef because I'm a musician, and we had it on the petitions. Lo and behold, this is the first year in history there are no emblems anymore. Right? Is the treble clef such a powerful thing? They're afraid it might get me a few thousand extra votes, or I don't know.
Or no.
No emblems. So now on this, the so-called candidates forum, so then they say, well, this year we're not going to have debate. What we really want is each candidate's going to be stuck in a little Zoom box, and we'll ask you 3 questions in 15 minutes. Now, they were so technically unskilled that they couldn't figure out how to keep a second candidate off the line. I only had 15 minutes, and I told them I had a very specific slot. So they actually had a former Democratic congressman. I mean, he's a Democrat, a Democratic congressman who came on before me, but who had been unseated and was trying to get his seat back. So I happened to hear the questions they asked this person. Total stuff. Oh, make your 2-minute opening statement. And what would you do about affordable housing? And how do you feel about the park in your neighborhood and blah, blah. That was what they asked him. So then I come on and they say, all right, didn't even give me an opening statement. Could you tell us what you would do to prevent an insurrection like January 6th from ever happening again? Isn't that amazing? So here I was so innocently thinking it was like a fair thing. And I said, well, before I do that, don't I get to make an opening statement? So then they begrudgingly allowed me to make an opening statement. And then I took up that question by saying that, well, maybe we should try and have transparent and fair elections and we wouldn't have these things. But, wow.
Yeah, I have 2 questions about that, like just to tab on that. First one is, are you going to be able to participate in any debate against Schumer? And second of all, I wanted to kind of make a comment and then ask your views on it. A lot of when I was researching, LaRouche, the Schiller Institute, and also just kind of, getting ready to prep to do the show, one of the things that came up, or that it's being called, is kind of like that you're in that not you per se, but like the organization is in disguise and there's actually an alt-right movement. It's been called a cult. It's also been, I think one of the languages that people don't like is the eco-fascism, because people that are into saving the ocean, saving animals, are feeling, okay, I'm not a fascist. I simply don't want animals harmed. I don't want the ocean destroyed. I don't want the world destroyed. But the finer point to that, and it may be a messaging thing, right? The title is that when you really look at the messaging, my interpretation, and you tell me if I'm wrong, is that it's more talking about the corporations that are going after and that sort of have infiltrated the green movement and co-opted it, rather than, but I could be wrong. So if you could clarify that portion, but first start with the debate question. Are you going to be able to debate, Chuck Schumer?
Well, my answer is I am. He just doesn't know it yet, and he hasn't agreed to it. They have scheduled a debate for October 30th, and if your listeners would help me break this blackout, I would love it. He and the Republican nominee, named Joe Pinion, whom I call No Pinion because he won't take an opinion on anything that's very important, and he refuses to talk about Ukraine and Russia, have scheduled a debate for 7 p.m. October 30th on Spectrum News, New York 1. And someone from my campaign actually sent them a letter saying, Diane Sare actually got 66,000 signatures to place her name on the ballot. She's the only person in the state who did that. That threshold was demanded to prove that you are a serious, viable candidate. So given that she met that threshold and she was the only one who succeeded, obviously she should be included in the debate, and we're simply awaiting your sending her the invitation.
Mm-hmm.
They wrote back and said, oh, no, you just don't understand. We only will allow people to debate if they get over, if the polls are showing them with over 15% of the vote. Now, we found that interesting because
they're moving the goalpost.
Well, and two of my supporters had said that they got called by these polls. And when they told the pollsters that they were voting for Diane Sare, they were told that's not a choice. You have to either choose Pinion or Schumer. And so we wanted to.
Thing with Matthew Ho, but the same thing happened to him, and they tried to get him. Well, he had to go to court because they took him off the ballot. The Democratic Party did.
Oh,
same tactics.
Right. No, exactly. Totally. So we actually got, so far now, I think we've found 3 of the 4 polling companies they search for and gotten the questions that they are asking voters. And in those 3, voting Diane Sare is simply not an option.
Wow.
So how I would have 15% of the vote where no one is allowed to say that they're going to vote for me. And of course, that's by design because they want to have some way to keep me off the debate. So we're going to expose this. I'm going actually to the international press because I can, and I'm sure you can imagine, all kinds of countries all over the world that the United States is bludgeoning for not being democratic enough are kind of interested in how democracy is going in the US. They're wondering if we're so democratic, why is Julian Assange sitting there in prison and why is Ed Snowden still in Russia? And they're very interested in the midterm elections. And I think a lot of them are actually following my campaign. And we're going to make Spectrum News and Schumer's office aware of that. And that's why I'm saying I intend to be included in that debate, but Schumer and Pinion just haven't agreed yet.
Okay. And to my second kind of, if you want me to reiterate.
No, I remember on the idea of green fascism. It is this great reset that Prince Charles is calling global Britain, where they know that eliminating fossil fuels in poor countries will massively increase the death rate. You see a horrific situation in Haiti right now, and where you really see the fraud of the so-called environmentalist movement. 75% of their energy comes from charcoal. Now, if you care about greenery, people's lungs, you know, you're going to encourage them to burn wood and burn dung. You say that that's better than having a clean coal, you know, they've cleaned up coal quite a bit, a coal-fired power plant, or, right? That is such, I mean, it's just such fraud. It's obvious the intent. Or in Europe, who did blow up the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipeline? That sure let an awful lot of methane into the air. And now we have people in Europe going back to burning down the forest. They're going to burn wood for fuel. Well, is that really so much better than natural gas? I mean, I think we really need to get to nuclear power. We should be beyond combustion.
Oh, but let me ask you about nuclear power, because I even heard that some, you know, and this is true, that some Green Party members would actually agree with that, some not. But my question about nuclear power is, and that's because I'm from California originally, and I lived in Monterey, and there's a nuclear power plant called in San Luis Obispo area, it's Montana de Oro is what it's called, right? Mm-hmm. But it's placed on the San Andreas Fault. And it sits right on it, on one of the most pristine parts of the coastline that is now inaccessible because of this, you know, nuclear power plant. But they don't know what to do with the radiation. They shut it down because they got more than they could handle. And so my question is, I know that we can develop technology, but what do we do with the radioactive waste? And look what happened in Japan. And in Japan is very, very efficient, but they still had Fukushima. And then of course you have Chernobyl, and you have, you know, so what is changing, and what can you tell people about nuclear power?
Well, first of all, there's a huge difference between, say, Chernobyl, Fukushima, and 3 Mile Island and so on. In Fukushima, as far as I know, people have not died from radiation. It's not to say that you didn't have a big cleanup job, but I actually thought that what happened there was a demonstration of how incredibly safe nuclear power is, because you had a massive tsunami which did the damage. And it's been a difficult cleanup, but you didn't have masses of people dying from radiation and so on. Chernobyl was a different thing because they were using the whole plant improperly, and it was a mess on the waste. And then all these other things like 3 Mile Island, there really was no issue, but the hysteria. Why? Because if you want to keep people impoverished and backwards, you've got to stop them from having any efficient form of energy. And then on the waste, we were actually in the 70s developing something called a breeder reactor. Carter shut it down, where you could take literally 96% of what we call waste is reusable. And the other 4% can be used in medical isotopes. And there's great uses for it in medicine, actually, very interesting things. And there's some very interesting work being done on low dose radiation. I don't know if you followed this, but apparently they used to use low dose radiation on treating pneumonia. And it had an incredible beneficiary effect. And then I don't know if it was after we dropped the nuclear bombs or what, there became such fear, they stopped doing it. And it was picked up again by some doctors, I think in Massachusetts, who were trying to figure out how to treat COVID. And they were going through every lung disease, everything. And they came across that this had been very effective. And they went back to trying low dose radiation. And the way they discovered, I think, was someone would have an X-ray and their lungs would begin to clear up. Mm-hmm. And so, there's a difference between moderation. There are clearly certain thresholds in living processes and non-living where one thing can be beneficial in a certain amount. And if you cross that threshold, then it's deadly harmful. Right. So that's something I think really a very interesting area of study, but we should be reprocessing the waste. We really should. We don't even need to mine anymore. We could use the waste we have to power new high temperature, gas cooled. We could power.
Well, Germany is going to go to nuclear. Is that true? I mean, I've been hearing that Germany is looking at that.
Germany? Mm-hmm. Going back to it, you mean? Yeah, they
are. Getting more aggressive about using nuclear energy.
Well, Germany was idiotic. They took Fukushima and shut down almost all of their nuclear plants, and that left them totally dependent on fossil fuels. There's a few nuclear plants that weren't shut. Now they're saying, well, maybe we shouldn't shut them down because we're all going to freeze this winter if we keep it up. But that gets back to what I said earlier. I mean, are they really going to stick? How productive is it to be allied with the United States if you're going to freeze and starve to death for the privilege of having a nuclear war with Russia? I think it might dawn on some people that this doesn't make that much sense.
Yeah, with friends like that, who needs enemies, right?
Exactly.
So could you talk a little bit about, I know there's some New Yorkers tuning in, but as the U.S. Senate, you'll be dealing with federal issues. Could you talk a little bit about your platform in general? And your stance with Medicare for all, things like housing, things like that.
Sure. I mean, number one, as LaRouche said, the system really is bankrupt. So you can't do anything unless you pull the rug out from under these billionaire crooks. And that means a kind of general bankruptcy reorganization. And our most important allies in doing that would be the biggest economies in the world: Russia, China, the biggest economy with, probably, frankly, definitely more productive than ours, but China, Russia, India would be a key. And what you'd want to do is get those nations together and basically say, we're going to write off the derivatives bubble. We're not going to honor this garbage anymore. The billionaires are going to have to take a hit. And if they only are left with a few $1 million, they'll probably survive. But if you can't run your local sewage treatment plant, you can't grow food, you're not going to survive. So bankruptcy reorganization, we're going to have to go back to fixed exchange rates globally, no more speculation on currencies. in the United States, and really every country should have its own version of the Glass-Steagall bank separation, where if people want to speculate, okay, fine, but they go to a separate bank and the taxpayer is not on the hook for it. And it's not, what do you call, whatever, you know, if you went to a gambling casino and it was a money back guarantee that you always won, that's sort of what these guys have, right? They can do whatever they want and they get bailed out and they get to come back and do it again, and we all pay for it. So no more of that.
Both sides, so the middle is the same. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, right. So the Glass-Steagall reinstatement, then the Federal Reserve has to be turned back into a national bank. And I know a lot of people, particularly libertarians, have a hard time with that. They just want to get rid of it and not have a national bank.
Right.
And
centralized.
Yeah. And I can say, well, you know, I can see why you'd have a problem with the Congress running a national bank or allocate, because what they're doing. But at least the whole point of the way
I think the 80 billion going to Ukraine, I don't know, is it really going to Ukraine?
Exactly. But at least that if you can change the composition of your Congress through the electoral process, if you can, you know, you do have a leverage on that, which you certainly never have with the Federal Reserve, because it's a bunch of private people meeting in private, deciding whatever they want. And we need a national bank because you do have to be able to issue credit for the things we do need, some of which you mentioned, affordable housing. And in New York, it's an absolute scandal. I know a number of...
Because like in Los Angeles, California, it's 70,000 people are homeless. Overall, you know, nationwide, and you know the statistic, it's over 500,000. But what is it in New York?
Well, you know, I find it very funny because they keep changing how they measure it. The New York Times reported on a study in 2018 that said there were 100,000 homeless children in the New York City public school system, 1 in 10. But then they say there's 54,000 living in shelters, and then they don't count others. So I frankly suspect that this 500,000, 500,000 homeless in the US is a lowball figure. I think it's much higher. I think if you have 100,000 homeless children in New York City, well, they have a mother at least, maybe a father. So that means just New York City, and there's plenty of homeless people in New York who are not children.
Right.
So that's at least, you know, like a quarter.
Right. Okay. Well, we do know.
Go ahead.
A quarter of 25% at least of children are at the poverty level right now in U.S. I don't know what it is in New York State.
I think it's 20%, but I'm not sure. That's what I vaguely remember. Yeah, and look, if you have, and of course the homeless children are not evenly dispersed. There are schools in Brooklyn and the Bronx where the majority of the kids don't have any security at home. Now, some of them are just living with relatives where you have 6 people sleeping in a living room. Some of them are in shelters where they have to worry about their mother getting assaulted while they're out, and they move from shelter to shelter. Some of them are on the street. So if your class has children experiencing this, what's the concentration level going to be? And how can any student in that situation learn? And what is the teacher supposed to do? I mean, I know many New York schools now stock, they have washers and dryers, they have toothbrushes, toothpaste, they have hygiene. I talked to a woman who retired and she came back as a substitute teacher. She said she went to a class and the smell of body odor was overwhelming because so many children had been unable to bathe.
Wow.
So, and see, that's what I'm saying. You have a society that cares that little about the population, about human life, and therefore you can fund these things, but you actually have to change the culture, because just throwing money, we see it. Do you realize there's $4 billion that they still have not spent from Sandy recovery aid that was authorized? And you have people in public housing in New York who have no heat, no hot water, water that's brown and smells bad, and somehow they can't use the $4 billion to address this?
Right.
So it's not a funding question, it's a morality question, and a cultural question. Do you think there's anything special about human beings? Is there a reason to make sure people are healthy, well-fed, have electricity, clean drinking water? Is there something valuable that a human being might contribute to the future or to society? And do we care about that? That's really the question, I think.
Right. And I've noticed that you seem to be surrounded by a lot of young people who are very supportive of your candidacy. Do you find, I don't know statistically what it is, but do you find that that's kind of your demographic right now, or what is it you're seeing as a candidate?
Well, it's interesting. According to Facebook, my biggest area of support are women in their 50s.
Oh, well,
so I guess I'm sort of a role model for people who are in my, category. Yeah. So, but it would be now in a time like this when we're facing nuclear war. If you're 20 years old, you hope that you're going to be around for another 80 years.
Yeah.
So it's a big, yeah, exactly. It's a big deal. So I can see that I'm the only one talking about it running for U.S. Senate. That's for sure.
Well, that's wonderful that you're taking up and putting your values out there to run for office to make change. And that's admirable. I wanted to ask you about the AOC thing, because we talked about it last hour about the activists questioning about nuclear war. And then she released, and I don't know if you've had a chance because you've been busy most of the day, but like she posted an answer on Instagram and basically referred to the activists as Putin puppets and repeating, again, propaganda from Russia. I've been called a Russian asset, as you may know. Tulsi Gabbard's called the Russian ass, a Russian asset. Who else? Tucker Carlson. Anyone who doesn't repeat the Department of Defense's, talking points. So, and you watch Jill Stein, of course, she's been called that for years because she's pushed against, the status quo. Are you getting any of that pushback from Schumer's campaign, or are they kind of keeping that rhetoric down?
No, they don't want to mention my name. I think they're terrified to even say my name. They act as if I don't exist, and they want everyone. And I'm happy to say I did manage to raise enough money to put up 3 large billboards in New York City in great locations, super visible. 2 of them say, and this is another crazy story, these things are expensive, it's more than rent to have a billboard up there. So I said, I want it to say, stop blaming Putin and look in the mirror. And I want a picture of Schumer looking in the mirror. And they said, no, you're not allowed to say Putin's name. And then they said, yeah, I'm not allowed to say Putin's name on a billboard, even though it's going to say paid for by Sare for Senate and the billboard company is not responsible. So then they also said, and we should tell you right now, you're not allowed to say the word Russia, China, or North Korea.
Who's they?
The board of the company that owns the billboards.
That is amazing.
Isn't it?
We're not even allowed to have the conversation anymore, are we?
No. Well, so I kept thinking, well, what would enrage these people the most that I'm allowed to say? So finally, I came up with US out of NATO, dump Schumer. And they approved that. That went up. So I have 2 billboards, one on the Gowanus Expressway in Brooklyn, which is Schumer's neck of the woods. So I like that. One in Queens on Northern Boulevard that says that. And then I got a 3rd billboard in Manhattan in the Chinatown area where you cross the Manhattan Bridge. And it says, why is Schumer afraid to debate Diane Sare? Vote him out. And I know that hundreds of thousands of people are seeing those. So I'm happy that I was able to do that.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to get your billboard up and that he who has no name, we won't mention his name, right? Yeah, that's so funny. That's censorship gone amok, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm really impressed with the activists that spoke out, and with you pushing back against Schumer. He's been in office for a long time. I talked about this last hour, and many of us, many of the citizens in the U.S. are frustrated with Dianne Feinstein, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Biden, all of them who've been fossilizing in their seats. What is your opinion about public service? Do you think, when you're looking at the way some of our members of Congress are enriched once they're in office monetarily, what is your opinion about that? And how will you be different if you're elected to Senate?
One thing I'm really thinking about is whether we should audit every single member of Congress, just because the things that they support, and it's, there are all these laws, but they obviously don't have any teeth in them. I'll tell you something. Mr. LaRouche never supported term limits. He thought that people should vote people out at a certain time. I actually just signed a pledge to support term limits because I'm afraid in this circumstance, it's not just Citizens United, or the money just has too much power at the moment. And maybe if there's a circumstance where you really need someone in office longer, or they're the best, then people can make an exception. They'll get a referendum, or they'll do something about it. But there are so many people in there who go back to, maybe they fought on the side of the British during the American Revolution or something, and now they're in the Congress. It's really bad. And I don't think people should be career politics. The point of a representative government is they're supposed to represent you. So you want people in there who are taxi drivers and farmers, and we have a few medical doctors, we have a few people other than lawyers, but we don't have a Congress that is representative of the American working productive population. I don't know anyone in the Congress who ever worked as a home health aide, for example. And therefore they are very isolated. And by the way, that's also why it's so important that people contact their congressman. If you can't nail them at a town hall meeting, which is really the best because you want to get them on the record saying things publicly, but write letters and call them and visit them, because they actually, and sometimes they literally don't know. I mean, how could Tonko write that stupid of a letter to Scott Ritter unless he really thinks that everyone wants to support Ukraine?
Right.
So that just means he's reading the New York Times, but probably his constituents haven't really talked to him about it.
Right.
And that's why reaching out to them and fighting to organize these representatives is very important. I mean, really super important, because they really live in a bubble. They're very protected. They don't go through the same hardship that most people do nominally.
I can attest. Yeah, I've been back there. Yeah. They do live in the bubble. And another thing they do is a lot of nepotism, and a lot of those corporations that give them donations, they hire the sons and daughters, mostly sons, of those people on the board, and give them jobs and give them, clout, right? And you've seen that, I'm sure. So Reade, I wanted to ask if you could. Reade is, I wanted to do a shout out to INN, to Independent News Network, who volunteers and helps. After my podcast was taken down by Spotify and other, it was censored for a while, and I had written articles for RT, op-eds, and those were censored. And as you know, RT is censored Europe. And so they were nice enough, INN, to give me this platform and to help me with the engineering and the tech part, because that's not my forte. Reade, could you please, I know people are watching and have questions for Diane. Could you lift up any comments or questions for Diane?
Yes, ma'am. We got two for you. One was, what instrument did you play? That was asked a few times. And the other was, what is it like, your upbringing as a Quaker? What was, if you can elaborate on that too?
Sure. Okay, well, I play trombone. That was my major at the conservatory. And I still play, although it's been a little rough to practice lately, but I found a wonderful group of brass players in Buffalo, and we've had some brass quintet rehearsals together, which I've enjoyed. Being brought up as a Quaker, I actually feel you're really encouraged, this idea of the light within, you're really encouraged to be truthful. And the whole point of not having a minister is the belief is that every person has a direct relationship with God. You don't have to go through someone else. And because the Quakers were very active, not only opposing slavery, but in the civil rights movement, I think I was very much influenced by the journal of John Woolman, who was an abolitionist in New Jersey in the 1700s, 1740s or so. He spent a lot of time in jail. And I think that was actually why when I heard LaRouche was likely to go to jail, I thought that might be a good, mean that he was a very good person. So it's, although my parents had very different backgrounds, my mother became a Quaker, but she grew up Presbyterian and was a Republican, I think, actually. And therefore, my parents never discussed politics in the house. And it wasn't until I had been married and out of the house for about 10 years that I discovered that my father had been in the civil rights movement in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was the treasurer at Brown University when they invited Martin Luther King to speak, and he participated in sit-ins at lunch counters in the South. And I mean, I had no idea of that growing up. But, you know, I think it's just part of that background. You know, LaRouche was a Quaker also, and he and I used to have many jolly moments laughing on some of the good, bad, and ugly about the religion.
Oh, that's really, I'm really glad that you share that with our audience. That gives another dimension to your background and who you are. So I want to thank you for coming here. And Reade, do you have any other final comments or questions you wanted to share with Diane?
No, ma'am. I think that's it. You're good to wrap.
Okay, Diane, what I wanted to do is kind of open up some space for you to say anything to my audience that you'd like to. We're on about, I think we're on 8 channels, or no, 8 platforms, 11 channels live, and then we'll have the recording out and it'll be on Substack as well. So we'll send you clips. And, you know, I'd really like for our audience to know a little bit more about you. So if you could just spend the next couple minutes and just kind of say what you'd like to say to our audience right now.
Thank you. I mean, first of all, I really want to thank you and Reade for allowing me to be on and being fair and letting me say what I want to say. Unfortunately, these days it's very unusual, as you know, you've said that. 2 things. One, I would really encourage people to get to know LaRouche. I think he's like Gottfried Leibniz, who was so libeled and slandered, and there was only one person at his funeral. And Leibniz was a brilliant thinker who made great discoveries, and because his work was suppressed, took people a long time to build on what he did, similar to Johann Sebastian Bach, who made incredible breakthroughs in musical composition, but his music was suppressed. And it was a revolution for composers like Schumann. Didn't ever get to study Bach until after he'd already written 2 symphonies. And then you hear the complete transformation of his musical insight after studying Bach. So when you suppress genius, or you suppress breakthroughs, you suppress freedom of speech or someone's process of discovery, you're really committing a crime against mankind. And here the United States had this brilliant thinker, Lyndon LaRouche, whom no one is supposed to know, and people aren't allowed to study the breakthroughs that he made in physical economy, why his forecasting was so accurate. And he used to always say that he was 2,500 years old because he had a sense of identity that encapsulated all of the breakthroughs of human civilization. I'll put it that way. So that's one thing. The other is I would like to tell people that we absolutely cannot give up. There's a reason why despair is among the 7 deadly sins. And I can share that I've had many sleepless nights wondering, where is the bottom? How much more are people going to put up with? What is the next totally evil thing that my own government is going to do? Can they do worse? And then they do worse, and it's so disturbing. But I think there is a poetic principle. Shelley expressed it in The Mask of Anarchy and in Defense of Poetry, and we saw it when the Berlin Wall came down, that if enough people really stick to what is true and stick to a question of love of mankind and love of the future, love of generations yet unborn, love of the generations that allowed us to be where we are, that the universe is just. Now, if we act like idiots, I'm afraid the universe will justly exterminate us. So we have to fight for a certain quality of goodness and ennoblement, and have faith that although we may not see the way that things are going to change, that it will happen because the universe will demand it.
Very beautifully put. I love Shelley. I've also, I love Shakespeare and all of that too. So, ageless and timeless thoughts of humanity and where we're going, and it resonates today. So Diane, if you could share with our audience, if people are, because I know I do have East Coast listeners and East Coast supporters, could you tell them how they could be involved with your campaign, find out more about you, and contact you? And we do in the comments below, like in the links, we do have some of your information, but if you could talk about that and your timeline to the too.
Right. Well, the election's in 3 weeks. And that's my website, sareforsenate.com, S-A-R-E. It's only 4 letters, sareforsenate.com. I'm on Twitter as Diane Sare, and I'm on Facebook, and I even went on TikTok, and I'm on Instagram a little bit, and on Telegram. So people can find me there. And there is an old-fashioned phone number to call the campaign, which is 646-328-1932. I chose that 1932 because it's the year FDR got elected. So 646-328-1932. You can reach my campaign office, leave a message. We'll be in touch with you. And we need people. We need lots of people getting out literature. I have in mind people standing on busy intersections, holding up banners. I want to puncture the blackout, and I want to force the debate. So if you want to give a call, if you're in New York or anywhere, call Spectrum News and demand that they allow me to participate in the debate on October 30th, the US Senate candidates debate. Call Chuck Schumer's office and ask him what he's afraid of and how come he's an autocrat. If he's complaining about democracy, then he should demonstrate it by having a debate with all the candidates on the ballot.
Very well put. And thank you so much. I know you're busy and I know it's late there, and I really appreciate the time that you took to explain everything to the audience and to talk about your platform. It was an honor to have you on the show, Diane, and I wish you all the luck in the world as you go up against Chuck Schumer, who's been there, I think, in the Senate like 40 years or something. I don't know.
He's been in the Senate 24 years, and he was in the House 18.
That's Biden. Yeah. 24 years, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Changes. Yeah. And also, as far as one more thing, for people that are involved, because there are some listeners who are very interested in the arts and music, are you doing anything to do with that at all, or have you? Teaching or anything?
I actually, on occasion, I resigned from the board of the chorus that I founded so that I wouldn't, be accused of promoting myself through the chorus or something. But I do direct on occasion the Schiller Institute NYC chorus in New York City, and people can look it up. And the area where I actually had the most training was in the spirituals, the old Negro spirituals. I had the privilege of working with a wonderful lady who's Sylvia Olden Lee, who was the coach of Kathleen Battle and Wynton Marsalis. She was the first ever African-American vocal coach at the Met. And her grandfather, I think, was a slave. Maybe great grandfather, I'm not sure now, but she really, really worked with me on that music. And I love directing the spirituals with the chorus. And I think it's something that's very universal. There's a reason why these songs were part of the civil rights movement. And I think it's music that's very accessible to Americans today and really important to learn and to do them in the way that they're intended and not jazzed up or turned into gospel music. So yes, if you look up Schiller Institute NYC Chorus, then you might end up working with me on some music.
That sounds wonderful. So to my audience listening tonight for this very long show that we had, thank you so much for everything. Thank you, Indy and INN, Reef, for working through my internet challenges and making us be able to be live on so many platforms. Diane, again, it was just an honor to have you, and I hope we talk again. I really will hope to see you in the debate against Schumer. I hope that works. And let us hope, everyone that's listening, you're not a Putin puppet if you want peace. You're not, a radical because you want, to have a safe place to live, clean drinking water, and healthy access to food. So feel, there are people around you that support you, audience members. So there's people like Diane that are putting themselves on the line to run for office, to try to make change. So support them, support whoever you feel resonates with you, and let's support peace. All right. Good night, everyone. Till next time.